Thank you, Shana, for the introduction. Let's get two things straight. The name is Koos, not Koos, it's okay. The second thing is that I've had a sore throat for the past 2 weeks. So I'll do my best to kind of recover the voice and do my story. And in the next half hour, I'd like to take you guys on a journey of the past 5 years of how I saw service design transforming from a post-it frenzy into a very professional endeavor. And how that changed my daily work, and how that also got me into developing a framework that I would like to share with you guys. So let me start 5 years ago. This is me. This is me when I still had no gray hair, and I still owned a shaver. But this is one of my finest brainstorm sessions to date. We were working for a mobility company, and we came up with all kinds of cool ideas for their new propositions. And unfortunately, let's say most of the ideas that we came up with during this brainstorm didn't leave the 3x3 post-it papers that we created. And I can reckon that for most of you, this is a very recognizable situation, right? Fast forwarding to the year 2016, and for Koos, this was the prime year for customer journeys. Let's say most of the companies that we worked with came to us to ask us for customer journeys, basically because everyone else was doing it. And they actually wanted to create a journey to then hang it on the wall and feel proud of how customer-centric they were acting. I remember a company, a healthcare company that we worked for, that asked us, or actually insisted us, to create a customer journey of their healthcare process. Only to then, when we hang it on the wall, find out that there was no budget to then act upon the journey and actually improve the customer experience. Again, pretty frustrating. For the past few years, I got increasingly involved in doing trainings. We found that a lot of companies now understood the value of service design and found out that it was something that they wanted to internalize into the company. They wanted to embed service design as a capability. So I ended up giving a lot of trainings, which for me was the best thing to do because I got to share my passion of service design with a whole bunch of other people. But still, I actually ended up with a little bit of a mixed feeling here as well. Because although I created a few real service design fans, when I got back to the companies that I trained them for a few months later, I saw those people ended up in the same daily work and the same daily routines as they joined the training with. Again, and especially this one, got me really frustrated. Up to the point that I got together with a few of my colleagues to try and find out what were the key factors that played a role in the success of some of our projects and the effectiveness of some of our trainings. And that actually led us to identify different patterns in those different projects. So we set out to put those patterns into a first framework, and we used that framework to kind of, as designers should do, share with our clients and talk through it, make a prototype of that model, and also validate with customers whether this was something that they could recognize. And all of those insights that we gained from all those conversations that we had with customers, we kind of embedded them into a model. And I would like to share with you guys that model today, which we call the service design maturity model. This model states the different maturity stages that an organization can go through when it comes to embedding service design within the organization. And the number one reason for most of the organizations that try to do this is to go through the process of customer-centric transformation. Their number one goal is to try to become a customer-centric organization. And by doing that, they want to do that through service design. Now we're up for a little bit of the theoretical part of the talk. This is the first part of the service design maturity model, which is a 5-stage model. This 5-stage model structures the process of that customer-centric transformation, starting with the first phase, which we call the exploration phase. This is all about the first service design enthusiasts within the organization exploring service design as a methodology and a set of tools that could be used in their daily work. Most of the times, those are people that are the lone rangers within a bigger company of which everyone is not aware of service design at all. When we get to the second phase, which is the proof phase, this is all about proving the value and evidencing the value of what service design can bring for the organization. So this is a very painstaking process for those first enthusiastic people in the organization to kind of get across the proof of service design being valuable to the rest of the organization. And only then, if you were able to do that, you can go up to stage number 3, which is about scaling service design. This is about trying to teach the core capabilities of service design to the rest of the organization so that you kind of democratize service design and not you being the only service designer in the room, but everyone applying it. When everyone adopted those service design capabilities, you can go to stage number 4, which is about integrating service design in the daily way of working, which includes adoptions when it comes to organizational structure, but also stuff like KPIs. And then we get to the last stage, which is basically about thriving service design within the organization, when for now, service design kind of got adopted within the bigger organizational culture, and people from an intrinsic motivation apply service design to create a better and more customer-centric experience. Now, when we created this model, we actually identified some patterns within each of those 5 stages that helped us to describe what was happening within that stage of maturity. And that ended up in creating 5 core dimensions that could define the service design maturity within an organization. And I'll quickly walk you through each of them. The first dimension that gives you an idea about how mature your organization is when it comes to service design is simply people and resources. So to what extent does the organization put people and resources into service design? And when we look at resources, I don't only mean time and budget, but also facilities like UX labs or customer panels or Post-its and Sharpies. Yeah. The second one is all about tools and capabilities. So you can have a lot of people within the organization that get the resources to do service design, but if they don't know how to do it, they will end up doing nothing. So this is all about the extent to which the people have the skills and capabilities to actually apply service design in their daily work. So this means mapping out journeys, doing customer research, and making prototypes. The third dimension is all about the beliefs and behaviors that people have within the organization. And that includes the organizational views that people have, but also the personal views that people have. It's about how people look at the focus on the customer, but also diversity and inclusivity within the organization. Or no, that's it. The fourth dimension is about organizational structure and systems. So this is all about the way that the organization is structured to facilitate effective service design within that organization. And a lot of companies also go through a transformation when it comes to an agile transformation, for example, where they start working in an agile manner and create multidisciplinary teams. That can be very effective for service designers as well to work in those multidisciplinary teams. But it also includes other structures that need to be in place, like formal function descriptions of what service designers should do and what are their responsibilities. And stuff like design systems should be in place. And the last dimension is all about metrics and deliverables. And this is the way that the organization incentivizes service design within the organization. So this can include the core KPIs of people or departments, but also includes the way that service design delivers upon its promise. So when we identified those 5 core dimensions, we actually found that we could describe each of the stages with those 5 dimensions. So on the next few slides, I will be having each of the stages with a small description of how they score on the 5 dimensions, but I won't go through all of them. So either try to write with me really quickly or grab out your cameras, because I will just highlight a few of those dimensions per phase. So within the exploration phase, this is specifically where we just have a few lone rangers in the organizations applying service design or being interested in service design. And most of them kind of lack the tools and capability to properly do it, and they probably acquired some of it in some workshops or trainings that they went to. The beliefs and behaviors are most of the times very business focused. And it really struck me with the talk of David Dunn, looking at how business managers look at problems or solutions. And one of the really striking examples was when I was working together with a utility company in the energy sector. And they are kind of managing parts of the electricity grid in the Netherlands. And one of the statements that one of the people in the organization stated was, "We don't have customers, we just have energy connections." So for me, it was a really striking example of how customer centricity was still very far away from the core beliefs of the company. In the second phase, you kind of get the first group of people together that might be interested in service design and start a first service design initiative. This initiative is most of the times not really tied to the organizational structure, so it just emerges somewhere regardless of that organizational structure. And most of the times those initiatives don't have any key metrics tied to them, but just some very basic deliverables like a customer journey map. In the scaling phase, we have increasingly more people adopting service design as a mindset and a methodology. Also, this is the moment when it is really important to kind of unify the language that people use within service design. And this is the moment that customer experience departments or service design departments are being created, just to kind of create a little bit of a core of competence within the company where people know where to go if they have any questions related to service design. This is also the moment that the organizational structure kind of starts to suffer under the demand of multidisciplinary working, because the silos that were still there don't really work in an effective way when it comes to multidisciplinary teams. When going to the fourth stage of integration, this is typically when the organization will decentralize service design again by making multidisciplinary teams and have one service designer or more service designers within each of the teams. So this is when service design departments kind of get abandoned again, and everyone will kind of flow into the organization and work in multidisciplinary teams. And this is also when customer-centric KPIs kind of go company-wide. So each of the multidisciplinary teams will work with customer-centric KPIs. And this is also the moment that most of the times customer centricity will start to be represented on a C-level. And in the last stage of thriving, it's all about having a mindset and culture of customer obsession. Everyone in the organization is aware of his or her impact on the customer experience and knows how he or she can affect that role. This is also the moment that each initiative within the organization is tied to customer-centric KPIs, and the entire C-suite is connected to customer centricity. So this was it for the theoretical part of the talk, and I'd like to share with you guys 3 cases of companies that we've been working with and how we've been analyzing their organization when it comes to the service design maturity and how it helped us to kind of go about further maturation of the organization as a result. And I must say, because of this model, we also got the opportunity to identify common barriers that different organizations experience within each of the stages. And we also found some effective, what we call growth strategies that might help organizations to overcome those barriers in order to mature further. The first case that I would like to share with you guys is a case of an insurance company in the Netherlands. And they were on the endeavor of starting a first customer-centric project coming from a very product-centered organization. And one of the things that was then very popular was to focus on what they call life events. And life events can be stuff like getting pregnant, marrying, or in this case, moving houses. So we did the traditional service design process of talking to customers that just moved houses and tried to find ways that we could be relevant as an insurance company in that process. And we actually came up with quite a cool proposition that we created an MVP of, and from there started to put it live. And we were actually lucky enough that this MVP kind of gained a little bit of traction, so it got popular. Up to the point that because we were running this MVP on our personal server, up to the point that we needed to decide who was going to own this new proposition. And we actually found out that within the process of moving houses, there were 12 products of the insurance company being relevant in that entire process. So we started talking to those 12 product owners and asked them if they would like to own the journey of moving houses. And we started with the biggest product owner, which was the mortgage product owner. And he actually said to us, I think it's a cool idea, but if I need to own this whole thing, I'm going to put in a lot of effort that's also going to contribute to the sales of the other 11 product managers. And I'm not willing to do so. So what we saw happening is that even though the beliefs of customer centricity were there, the organizational structures and the metrics, the KPIs that those product managers had, were still very much product-centered, and therefore were not effective to own an entire journey. So that resulted in this new proposition not being owned by any of the 12 product owners and kind of dying a very slowly death. So what we learned from that is to, in an early stage, try to identify what we call the maturity differences Not only on a dimension level, so the difference between the beliefs and the metrics, for example, but also on a level of departments, teams, and individuals within that organization. Because if you try to kind of move forward with parts of the organization when it comes to the maturity, and other people are still lacking behind, you're just creating a lot of tension between those two groups. And you're kind of enlarging the gap there. So our advice is to then try to focus on those differences and try to work the weakest link. Try to find those people that are least mature and let's see if you can kind of pull them up a little bit to get them closer to where you're at. The second case is a case for an energy utility company that I already mentioned before. And we've been working with this company for a few years now, and we've been running our fair share of service design projects together with the customer experience department there. Up to a point that they kind of figured it might have made sense to create, to kind of adopt the service design skills within the organization so that we can so that we don't need Koos as an agency all the time, and we can kind of make them redundant in a way, or us redundant. So we thought it was a cool idea, and we started creating a service design toolkit that created a standardized way of working when it comes to service design for the entire organization. And from there, we started training a lot of people within the organization. But within those trainings, we got a lot of resistance of people. And they were actually saying, yeah, we just got introduced to Lean Six Sigma, and now you get us introduced into service design. What do you want us to do? And which of the two do you want us to follow? And then we figured that it was actually not a good thing to train those people in service design. Basically, because within the CX department, we showed our evidence and we kind of convinced them in working in a customer-centric way using service design, but the rest of the organization was still in the belief that service design was not adding value for them. So what we learned here is to stop service designing and start impacting the business. Because if you want people to adopt service design, they need to understand what can be the positive impact on business before they get enthusiastic about it at all. So one of the things that we often see happening is that people start to kind of get enthusiastic about service design in regards to customer journeys or personas, and they start to kind of become very enthusiastic about, look at me, I created this cool journey, and this is awesome, and you should also do service design. But this is actually pretty ineffective. What we propose is to do what we call Trojan horse projects. Those are projects in which we use service design tools, but we don't get any focus on the tools itself, but just on the business impact that we're trying to get going. And only if we created that business impact, then we can go to the rest of the organization, tell them, well, we increased customer satisfaction with 10%. Oh, and by the way, we did that by using customer journeys, etc. The third case and last case is of a large European bank that actually just went through an Agile transformation where everyone was going from silos to work in multidisciplinary teams. And the cool thing was that in each of the multidisciplinary teams, they assigned a customer experience specialist. So the cool thing was that they were actually adopting the structure, the organizational structure that was needed for service design. But most of the customer experience specialists within the organization lacked the skills and capabilities to fulfill their role. So we started setting up a training program together with them to start training those people with the right capabilities so that they could actually go back to their multidisciplinary team and start working in a customer-centric way. One of the things that we found is that when we started training those people and sending them back to their multidisciplinary teams, if we were just training one person, they would need to convince the rest of the team, which was around 7 to 9 people, to work in this fashion. And that's a very complex and hard job to do. So we learned that it's needed to convert a critical mass within that team to make sure that you can encourage true embedment of service design. So we started not to only train the service designers or the customer experience specialists in that team, but try to train the entire team for them to adopt the mindset of service design and customer centricity to then apply it in a better way. And we saw some really good results from it, where the teams that were trained as a whole applied service design in a more holistic way. They applied the tools in design in a better way, and also got better customer outcomes. So to finish my talk, I'd like to share with you guys my 3 key learnings of applying this model to some of the situations that we've been in as a company and to help our clients. Just in the hopes that you guys can learn a little bit from my learnings, and that if we get together again next year, that we won't talk anymore about the mistakes that we've made that I just mentioned about pulling off brainstorm sessions where nothing got implemented and try to train people that a few months later were back to their daily normal work. So the first lesson that I would like to share with you guys is that customer-centric leadership may arise anywhere in the organization. And this is a really important one to stress, because what we see happening in a lot of organizations is that people say, I don't have any mandate from C-level to start working in a customer-centric fashion. But what we've seen in a lot of organizations is that you don't often need the mandate or the okay go from the CEO to start working in this way. You can already find small ways in which you can work in a more design-centric way and start a movement from the bottom up and start creating evidence that this can actually be of value to the rest of the organization, and then step outwards to the rest of the organization. So please don't wait for your boss to say okay, but just start implementing those things on a small scale. The second lesson is use your design. You can use your design skills for further maturation of the organization. We've seen a lot of organizations where designers were just so passionate and so enthusiastic about service design that they tried to kind of evangelize service design within the organization and tried to get other people to also become enthusiastic. And it has shown to actually be quite ineffective. What is much more effective is to use our design skills to empathize with one another, to understand the needs and behaviors of your fellow colleagues, to understand what is withholding them to work in a customer-centric fashion, and try to see if you can eliminate or lower some of those barriers together with them. And what's then also really important is try to start small. Try to see if you can just make a very small prototype, make a very small alteration to how people work, and try to iterate from there. And the last lesson that I would like to give to you guys is to mind your changing role as a service designer. When you're moving through the maturity stages within your organization, and you move from exploration all the way to integration and thriving, your role as a service designer is drastically changing. In the exploration phase, for example, it's okay to be the hands-on service designer that's running projects, that's mapping out journeys. But at the moment that service design is being democratized within the organization, and now suddenly everyone is doing service design, your role changes as a designer. And I'd actually like to encourage you guys to maybe even cross off the title of service designer and start being a trainer, for example, or start promoting service design within the company without you doing all the work. So I want you to be aware of that all of those different roles that you can have as a service designer, they require different capabilities from you as a person as well. And we've been hearing a whole lot of them during this conference, like working with power structures, working with governance, working with all those kinds of things. And that's really important to start adopting those capabilities, because if you, and I think we are now on a moment that a lot of organizations come to the point that they understand and see the value of service design. Now it's up to us to up our game, because I think that our profession is really changing. Thanks very much.